This is
BBC Radio 4
Extra.
The TV sitcom Last of the Summer Wine drew to a close in 2010. In its heyday, the adventures of senior citizens Compo, Foggy and Clegg drew audiences of over 19 million. In this programme from 2010, Ian McMillan goes behind the scenes to uncover some of the secrets of this pioneering show.
When we're dead and gone, people will still be watching Last of the Summer
We've been
Wine.
coming here a few years, haven't we?
Yeah.
And look at the people here today.
We were shocked at how many people were
Yeah,
here
we
today.
can't believe how many people was here.
And it's a shame it's the last one.
Characters are getting old now, so they can't go on forever, can they, really? So
It's just that humour though,
Yeah,
isn't it? It's
yeah.
everyday humour, and it's what happens in people's families, you know, like them arguing in the cafe and things. People do that.
We've grown up with it since I was a little kid, you know. Sorry to see it go, but everything can't continue all the time, can it?
The wistful voices of a handful of Sunday visitors to Holmfirth in West Yorkshire, adjusting to the loss of Last of the Summer Wine, one of the best-loved comedy shows from the last 40 years. People loved that programme because it was gentle, it was nostalgic, it was sweet, and it was brimful of words. I liked it, not only because it was set in Yorkshire, but because it showed that older people could be as daft and playful and thoughtful and sexually frustrated as everybody else. But now, appropriately, at the end of summer, the wine has finally run out. My name's Ian McMillan, and for the next half hour, we're going to be celebrating and marking the passing of a gentle comedy set in a mythical north of flat-capped cuckolds, bobble-hatted romantics and unlikely sex symbols in droopy wrinkled stockings. Join me as I reflect on a television programme that, at its heart, was just three men talking poetically and philosophically, sometimes about women, sometimes about the past, often about nothing at all. Let's play that harmonica, shall we?
Oh, cheer up. Life's easier once the fire in the blood dies down.
When did yours die down?
Well, I must have been nearly 23.
It was revolutionary. It was revolutionary to get outside and watch these people doing wild things.
Steady! Go!
I've always likened it to Wind in the Willows. I've likened the characters to Ratty and Mole and Badger. I've neglected her.
Sounds reasonable to me. If I had Nora Batty, I'd neglect her too.
I think it's good old-fashioned television. It's filmed beautifully, it's performed beautifully, and it never ages.
Are you sure it's safe, Howard? I wouldn't bring you anywhere where you weren't safe.
Well, you needn't go as far as that.
Its success has always been a surprise to me, and I know it's always been a surprise to lots of people. There must have been something in there that clicked with the viewer's bloodstream, and here we are. Well, there we were.
The other day, I was walking down the street in the South Yorkshire village where I live, and three old men were wandering down the other side of the road. A bloke at a bus stop pointed and shouted, "Now then, Last of the Summer Wine!" And we all laughed, the laughter of a shared joke. When the programme began, all those years ago, born out of the BBC's Comedy Playhouse strand, it felt to me like a heightened version of the banter you heard in pubs, in barbers' shops and on the lower decks of buses. It was a mixture of northern brussenness and the soft surrealism you sometimes heard if you listened hard enough in an allotment on a Sunday afternoon when the lads gathered by the shed. There were touches of music hall there, and fragments of the acts of forgotten working men's club turns, and stories so old they felt like folk tales. At times it was almost Shakespearean. The men, the women, the love, the language, the occasional cross-dressing, and the working out of what the world is through endless, endless talk.
No, just I think my magnetism could be slipping.
Oh, don't ask me. I was a total failure at romance.
But you were married.
That's what did it.
I set out on that walk with the sun coming up. I walked above Dickley where...
For years, Holmfirth was just a place you went through on the Manchester bus, after New Mill and before Mossley and Greenfield. It was an ordinary West Yorkshire town, and the most noteworthy thing about it, in my mind, was that it wasn't far from the gloriously named village of Upperthon.
I can't imagine this series being set anywhere else but this place, Home Firth.
Writer Roy Clark.
Jimmy Gilbert, who was going to produce it and direct it, rang me up and said, all right, where are we going to set this? And we genuinely didn't know where to set it. But then Barry Took somehow got hold of the script. I don't quite know why. He'd been doing a series on Northern working men's clubs. He said to Jimmy, you want to set this in Home Firth? And so we went, and we came as strangers to here and fell in love with it immediately. It was ideal.
The town itself is marvellous. Wherever you point the camera, you've got an interesting shot.
Summer Wine producer and director Alan Bell.
The people of Home Firth are absolutely fantastic. They put up with us because we close roads and we generally cause enormous upset.
Last of the Summer Wine location manager, Sylvia Kendall.
They look forward to us coming every year, and I'm sure they're going to miss us. And I have to say I'm going to miss them because we have become really very good friends.
Now, to visit Home Firth is almost to visit a fictional place, like Weatherfield or Emmerdale or Gotham City. The town has become so synonymous with Last of the Summer Wine, with tourists wandering round the locations they've seen on TV, that I worry for the town when the series finally ends. What can it do? Can Doctor Who's TARDIS ever be a police box again once it's been a time machine?
To look across those valleys and those hills, and it is a great part of the world.
Peter Sallis.
I've been there when the fields look like they've been painted by Van Gogh. I mean, they're yellow.
Writer Roy Clark had found the ultimate backdrop. After all, you couldn't imagine the show happening in Bexley Heath. And soon a perfect cast was assembled to present his fantastic dialogue. The original three wise blokes were Compo, Clegg and Blaymire. And in a sense, they were almost a geriatric version of the goodies, with the posh one, the sensible one, and the daft one called Bill. As ever in British comedy, there was a class element, creating fiction between Blaymire and Compo. And, as often happens, a man called Clegg held the balance of power.
Now you wait here. It's not only my city and gills, it's the social chasm between us. Hey, Cyril, give us a fag, I'll give you a sniff of me socks.
Michael Deacon is the TV journalist for the Daily Telegraph.
To me, it really reminds me of childhood. I was growing up in the 80s and the early 90s, and my parents were used to watch it, and it feels as if I was always watching it. And although even as a child, I don't think I actually found it funny, I still somehow liked it because it was comforting, you know. It was the TV equivalent of a hot water bottle, and I think on a Sunday evening it was ideal because, well, certainly for me at that age, it was wonderful for quelling the homework back-to-school blues.
Often great British comedy, I think, is set in a fictional playground. So even when you look at recent examples like The Office, they were overgrown schoolboys, you know, flicking elastic bands and showing off to each other.
BBC head of comedy, Mark Freeland.
Looking back into the 70s, of course, Dad's Army was at its height, where again you had an ensemble of hapless twerps who'd never quite grown up, but it was the interplay between them that really took that sitcom onto a huge level. And I think that's the same in Last of the Summer Wine, because I think one of the misapprehensions about it is that, oh, it's that comedy about old people. Well, it's not. It's about old people behaving badly.
Well, it's just an ordinary dart.
It's not an ordinary dart. It's very far from being an ordinary dart. I've prepared it with something to make the creature sleep. Oh, don't worry, I've seen the natives do this in the jungle.
Yeah. They've got poisons growing in the jungle. What have you got?
The trained soldier learns to make do with whatever's available. You have to use whatever comes to hand.
All right, what is it that soaks the darts in that's going to put it to sleep?
Well, if you must know, it's Horlicks.
There used to be a lot of characters about in these northern villages. Compo came to me first, based on 2 or 3 people, quite scruffily dressed, and it was orchestrating that. What do you do with it? Well, you get somebody who's the total opposite, like, you know, middle class and snobby, and those two would have absolutely nothing in common and wouldn't exist together for 5 minutes unless you had someone in the middle who could sort of referee and keep the whole unit together, and that was Clegg, of course.
But the Summer Wine story is not just a tale of 3 men and their lives. The original trio have mutated like a tribute band. After Blamire, there was Foggy, Seymour and Truly, each bringing their own bespoke eccentricities to Sunday evenings. Foggy was ex-army, and his upper lip stiffened in the Holmfirth wind. Seymour invented things just because he could. Truly used to be a police officer in the days when they were called policemen. Frank Thornton.
I thoroughly enjoyed working with such good material and such jolly good actors as Bill and Peter.
Why do you think it is they won't let me go?
You've been shot at. Now it's somebody else's turn.
It's because they're ashamed of me, because I'm scruffy.
Oh, wouldn't say scruffy. Would you say scruffy?
Yes, I'd say scruffy.
Behind these principal boys, like subs on the bench or buddies in a buddy movie, are the rest of the men. All of them variations on that sad, downtrodden semi-clown that Roy Clark creates so well. Sid at the cafe, with a face like a half-inflated balloon.
You can't just go digging in like a lunatic with that screwdriver.
Well, pass me something sharp, I like your tongue.
Howard, the man-child with the drawn-on tash.
I'd love us to stop and just explore more.
Billy Hardcastle, who may well have been a direct descendant of Robin Hood, as he claimed.
I'm only joined to do Robin Hood.
Nora's odd neighbour, Alvin Smedley.
I keep acting like somebody who's trying to hide a woman in the house.
Smiler Hemingway, a presence you could scare children to sleep with.
I was younger. I've got more personality now.
And Walter Batty, music hall personified, with a West Yorkshire r that was always far superior to Compo's strangled efforts at talking tyke.
I'm ready, yes, I'm ready.
Hobbo the milkman, who would rather be James Bond.
But even my enemies never knew that I was Ace Hobdyke, secret agent.
And of course, Entwistle, played by the mighty Burt Kwok. A career trajectory from Tenko to tea cakes in Sid's Caff via the Pink Panther.
You know what I like about this?
What?
Very little.
All of them just the right side of believable, just a little bit like the uncle who turned up to the wedding, or the man in the betting shop you tried to avoid.
These characters became quite real to people. I mean, they're quite real to me, I must confess. They really are. And I just miss them.
Of course, Last of the Summer Wine isn't just about the men. It's also about the eternal kerfuffle between men and women, or at least the promise of kerfuffle.
I must have enemies.
There's me for a star.
If you think it started in the 1970s, and at its heart, right in the centre, it's always been henpecked men or very, very strong women. And, you know, it gave some great, strong female parts when that wasn't happening in British television or British comedy.
Anyway, you're allowed to be stupid at 17.
You were never 17. You were 40 when you were born.
The women are a doughty bunch, mainly smelling of Parma violets or bacon fat. Nora Batty, the queen of them all, about whom more later. Ivy, the gatekeeper of the calf, Pinny tighter than a chastity belt. Edie, a character who could have been a caricature, but to whom the late Thora Hird brought a steely dignity.
Wesley? Wesley? Wesley, get yourself in here.
Pearl, long-suffering and always surprised by her husband's clumsy attempts at infidelity.
Is in search of the silent bicycle. See, it's when they're quiet, you know they're up to something.
Auntie Wainwright, who was really Hilda Ogden with a china cup.
You don't think I've always been a grasping old woman?
And Aunt Ros Utherwaite with her checkered romantic past.
I was always saved from something serious by my tendency to giggle.
And we can't forget Marina, of course, the sex pot of the mill towns, the woman who was just like the glamorous dinner lady we all fancied as kids.
I must warn you, I'm only available for the next 24 hours.
We're actually walking now towards Nora Batty's in Hollowgate and Holmfirth. We're just going over the little bridge, which is very narrow. We have the pub on the corner here.
What was that for?
That's before you start.
Hey, we're a bit touchy this morning, aren't we?
So these are the famous steps of Nora Batty's. This is where you used to see her with her brush, brushing her steps down, hanging her washing out, wrinkled stockings and shouting at somebody. Every day of the week, there's always somebody here taking photographs, and as I say, they come from all over the world.
Why don't I take a day off? Why don't you take one on?
Most viewers, if asked, would say that the central relationship of the show was between Compo and Nora Batty. It's an archetypal story of unrequited love with real humanity at its heart.
Doesn't it feel anything?
Like what?
Attraction. Physical attraction.
In the end, we cared about Compo and Nora in a way we never really cared about Popeye and Olive Oyl, and this is partly the writing and the acting, and partly because, particularly in small towns and villages, these kind of half affairs go on, stymied by convention and stockings that simply won't stay up. And now the name Nora Batty has entered the language as a description of a certain kind of woman for whom the fire has somehow gone out, or at least become wrinkled.
Nora, tell me, what does the sea?
So you've got another hole in them trousers.
They were great friends.
Bill Owen's son, Tom.
But they were very similar in a way that as soon as that camera stopped turning over, they'd just go off set. Bill would go back to his newspaper and do his crossword, and Kathy would go back with her dear husband John and read her book in the caravan. And then they would come together in this immediate spark of probably one of the greatest love stories of all time.
That character that Bill created was the finest comedy creation that's ever been on television.
I think Compo sees Nora as the Elizabeth Taylor of Homeford.
What are you doing, peering round corners?
Not so loud. There's a man assaulting a woman.
Well, do something about it.
I can't.
Why ever not?
He's not started yet.
We had one or two scenes over the years where she's been so surprised. She said, well, he never even looked at me. What's wrong with him? You know, so when he did ignore her, she didn't like it at all. So I think there was a fondness for Compo.
The voices of the sadly missed Kathy Staff and Bill Owen. If the main unrequited love story of Last of the Summer Wine was the one between Compo and Nora Batty, then the second violins were certainly played by Howard and Marina. Howard was a version of the tongue-tied lad who's speechless in front of a miniskirt, and Marina is a seaside postcard temptress. At its core, this was more a flirtation than an affair, with more dry ice than steam. And I wonder what would have happened if the series had continued. A wedding, maybe, with Marina pedalling her bike up the aisle to Here Comes the Bride, played by Howard on the harmonica. Or at least a kiss, wreathed in dry ice. Robert Fife and Gene Ferguson play Howard and Marina, reunited for this programme.
I think my character, much maligned, much misunderstood, because really she's not sleazy in any way whatsoever. She's just a bit misguided, really, and she tries too hard and she dresses badly and she wears too much makeup.
Well, it was all fantasy time, really, wasn't it? I mean, he wasn't going to leave Pearl, his wife, because she's much better cook, I think. But, you know, the chance
I think
just
we all
to get
know
out.
that. I think we all knew it. Pearl knows it, Howard knows it, Marina knows it deep down. And it's just like a kid's game, isn't it, really?
I bet they think we're up to something.
The thought does cross your mind.
Well, I want you to know, I'd never do anything to compromise your reputation.
Not on a bicycle. I can see that. I think your character's got more timid and mine has got more disillusioned over the years. And I mean, she used to be very sort of eagerly anticipating what's going to happen, you know, in various scenes. And of late, it's been, she raises her eyes heavenwards and goes, oh, God. You know, she kind of gives up.
Well, that's a long time to have kept an unconsummated love of her going.
Exactly.
We're in the cafe at the moment, where you see Ivy. Well, all the artists come in here, don't they, for a cup of tea or coffee. And what you see here is exactly what we have in the studio.
You do realise you'll be representing your country?
No problem.
Well, we haven't been at war with France for ages. I suppose it had to end sometime. Just as long as they don't think we all look like that.
In 1999, a Millennium Special episode saw Trulli, Compo and Clegg journey to France. But during the filming, it was clear that Bill Owen, who was now 85, was very ill. Despite this, because of the trooper he was, he made a commitment to finish the special. The most touching moment of this episode came as Bill stood proudly in character, with Trulli and Clegg standing to attention on either side with their medals gleaming on their chests. Compo lifted a bugle to play what became a very poignant version of The Last Post, and Clegg released a pigeon called Gladys into the blue sky.
When Bill died, he died in the middle of a series. Had he died between series, we'd probably have come to an end then.
It was very difficult to film Compo's passing episodes, and there was a feeling from everybody that this was a moment in television that would be forever remembered.
Are we going to see him?
I can see him. Fooling about, hands in his pockets, dragging his wellies.
Are we going to see him before they close the lid?
Well, I'm not so sure about that.
You'll be sorry. Besides, how often do you get to see something for nothing these days?
In the comedy series, you don't have death, you know, nobody dies. For some reason or other, they decided in this, as Bill was now no longer there, they decided that Compo had to die. When we got to the funeral cortege, there was the hearse with the coffin inside. And on top of the coffin were Bill's wellies. So it's wonderful to see this very solemn procession with his bed of dirty old wellies on top of the coffin. I always remember that.
Roy wrote 3 episodes. Those 3 episodes were the most moving, most touching, most beautifully crafted and hilariously funny episodes that I've ever seen on television. How he took that tragedy and without losing a speck of the tragedy, without losing any of the grief that we all felt about losing Bill, he turned it into humour.
The last of the summer wine. The blossom soon begins to fade. A lonely bird high on a hill sings, autumn's on its way.
Much of the appeal of Last of the Summer Wine is down to the haunting theme music, composed by the great Ronnie Hazelhurst. On one level, it's counterintuitive, as you might have expected it to be played by a brass band or sung by a choir. Somehow, though, the fragility of the mouth organ, with its echoes of the war and of the school playground, feels exactly right. It's unashamedly sentimental, and somewhere in the plangent notes, there's regret, loss, tragedy, irony, and the worst ice cream van you ever heard.
La da dum, dee 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 dee. La da da dum, dee 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 dee.
Da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 dee doo. It's a lovely, simple little tune.
That tune epitomises the English countryside as well as, if not better than anything that has been written since Greensleeves.
Well, it goes hand in glove as with the material. It's one of the greatest television themes I think ever composed.
BBC head of comedy Mark Freeland is in no doubt about Summer Wine's value to the schedules.
I think it's interesting. It's always been at the forefront of changes, and that's maybe because it's been going for so long. But, you know, it was the first comedy to be produced in HD, for example. It invented, pre-Only Fools and Horses, the extended version, the 90-minute special. And also, I think it was brave enough to include a huge cast. Up to that point, that hadn't really been the case. And also, it embraced its location.
I was actually talking to my father when it was announced that the programme was going to be cancelled, and I'd expected him to, throw the phone down in disgust because he's such a long-term fan of the show. He'd been probably watching it all of those 37 years, but he said it was probably for the best, in the way that you might reluctantly have to put down a sick pet or something like that. He felt that it had probably had its day, and that in a way he felt it had become too silly.
Well, it's come down to earth now.
We had something that touched people's memories, I think. I think we've got a foothold in a world that probably never was.
It's Never Never Land. The goings-on in the programme have absolutely nothing at all to do with what is happening in the outside world.
Last of the Summer Wine has just elevated me, as it has millions of others, in a very gentle, dignified, and sometimes naughty way.
It's a phenomenon, the show. Phenomenon. We lost some irreplaceable characters, It had its good life and finished in time,
Well, when I personally first heard that it was coming to an end, the programme, I was just incredibly sad.
Because it had become a way of life. And the crew were wonderful. It was like, a family reunion.
You have to appreciate I'm standing here now on Nora Batty's steps, and I'm just looking around, and who am I missing? I'm missing the artists, I'm missing the crew, I'm missing everybody. And remember, I live here, so it's very hard.
I'm very sad in a sense. I feel for the viewers because it's good old-fashioned viewing, which I don't think we'll ever see the likes of again.
So that's it. The last of the Summer Wine. The last post for a show that somehow seems too innocent, too fragile for the second decade of the 21st century. It's been said that it was a show that evoked smiles rather than laughter. And maybe that's true. And it's also true that sometimes over the last few years it's felt a little tired, a bit unsteady on its feet.